The story, You Better Watch Out, by Thomas M Malafarina, describes a middle-aged man named Clark who encounters a creepy animatronic Santa Claus at a mall toy store. The robot stands about 5 feet tall and is dressed in a traditional red and white costume intended to entertain children and attract visitors. However, Clark notices that many kids, especially younger ones, avoid the Robo-Claus. You Better Watch Out, by Thomas M Malafarina. Copyright 2020, Thomas M Malafarina. A good many things go around in the dark besides Santa Claus. Herbert Hoover. The main reason Santa is so jolly is because he knows where all the bad girls live. George Carlin. You'd better watch out. You'd better not cry. You'd better not pout. I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. John Frederick Coots and Haven Gillespie. It was meant to be fun. It was supposed to be entertaining. But from the first moment the middle-aged man saw the awful thing, he found it not only hideous, but damned creepy to boot. It stood about 5 feet tall, wearing the traditional red and white costume everyone was accustomed to seeing during the holidays. It was an animatronic Santa Claus, was put in front of the mall toy store, supposedly to bring joy to the many children who frequented the establishment, and likely to help attract others. However, Clark noticed most of the kids, especially the younger ones, avoided the Robo-Claus at all costs, and he most certainly couldn't blame them. There was something sinister about those eyes, peering out from that rubber face with its fake white hair and beard. They were like the eyes of one of those weird paintings that seemed to be staring a hole in you, no matter where you stood. The ones that followed you when you moved around a room. Really creepy. At the base on which the simulated Santa stood, there was a big red mushroom-styled button, located between its black boots. If one of the kids was daring enough to approach the thing and press it, the machine would go into its pre-programmed routine. It would shake its hips, twist its head from side to side, and wave its arms while playing that horrible tune. He watched some of the kids reacting to the show. On the surface, they appeared to be entertained, laughing and pointing at the robot, but Clark saw other expressions on their faces, the ones that couldn't quite conceal themselves with their false bravado. These were looks of uncertainty and, in some cases, fear. Hearing the animatronic elf bellowing out his ho-ho-ho after shaking about and singing that awful song didn't help matters either. Clark detested that tune and had hated it from the time he was a small child. The song was Santa Claus is Coming to Town. In his youth, young Clark Dawson had always been terrified by the words to that song. He felt like they portrayed the actions of some sort of psycho stalker who was watching his every move, as if having his parents tell him that God and Jesus were watching him all the time wasn't bad enough. Now the poor kid had some fat guy eyeballing him from the North Pole, threatening to ruin his Christmas if he didn't walk the straight and narrow. For a little kid, this had been a lot of pressure. As an adult, Clark had gotten past most of that childhood angst and just found the whole idea of Santa watching children disturbing, but not as disturbing as this gyrating, singing robotic simulation of something whose strangeness he had never entirely outgrown. And those eyes, those god-awful eyes, which seemed to stare a hole into his very soul. He felt like the character in Edgar Allan Poe's A Telltale Heart, ally murderer and dismemberer. Clark wanted to take this storefront abomination and tear it to pieces as well. If he were a rich man, he would have gone into the store and offered to buy the thing. Then he would have taken it outside and destroyed it. He'd especially love stomping on its voice mechanism and smashing whatever it was that played that horrible song. But he wasn't rich. In fact, he had never been less wealthy in his entire life. He had just lost his job, or perhaps more accurately, his job had just lost him. Clark had been fired from his position as assistant financial officer for a small company where he had worked for the past 30 years. He supposed he should consider himself lucky that management had opted to simply terminate his employment rather than press charges. After all, at his age and complete lack of any reasonable physical conditioning, he would not do very well in prison. So, all things considered, the firing, painful as it was probably the best alternative for him. He only wished he had saved some of the money he had embezzled over the years. He certainly could use it now, Clark still wasn't sure what he was going to tell his wife when he got home, and he wasn't certain he cared. Ironically, he was certain she would leave him once he told her he had been fired, yet it had been her spending habits that were the catalyst for him to begin siphoning money from the company in the first place. Boy, could she ever spend money. Now that he had given it some thought, however, maybe it would be better if she did leave. She would surely take him to the proverbial cleaners, but at least he would be free for the first time in more than 35 years. No job, no wife, and probably no house or other possessions when she was done fleecing him. There would be nothing holding him back. He began to think maybe things weren't really all that bad after all. Maybe what started as a crappy situation had just turned around and worked in his favor. He looked over at the hideous robotic Saint Nick, gave a sly smile, and said, "Thanks, Santa. Looks like I got everything I needed for Christmas. I just hadn't realized it before." And that was when he noticed a slight twitch from the machine's head. Nothing major, just the smallest twist of the head, no more than a fraction of an inch. But he had seen it. He was certain. Probably only some leftover tension in a spring, or maybe a gear slipping into place, he said to himself. He knew such things happened with mechanical devices. Then he suddenly heard a voice from somewhere deep inside his head saying, "Clark David Dawson, little Clarky. My, but it seems you've been quite a naughty boy this year, haven't you?" "What? Who said that?" Clark asked, searching the faces of the crowd streaming through the mall, busy with their Christmas shopping. At first, he assumed someone must be nearby, somebody who was playing a practical joke on him, attempting to screw with his head, but deep inside, Clark knew that wasn't true. Nobody was playing a joke. None of the faces he saw were familiar. None of these people knew his name, especially not his middle name, and he hadn't been called Clarky since he was 8 years old. It was impossible, yet somehow it was true. He looked again at the animatronic Saint Nick and realized the voice he was hearing inside his skull was coming from the machine. Its lips didn't move, yet Clark heard it speak, and those piercing blue eyes, robotic or not, were tearing him down, making him feel like he was becoming a terrified little boy again. "Shame, shame, shame, Clarky," the voice persisted. "Stealing money from a company that was considerate enough to give you a job and a steady paycheck for so many years. There'll be coal in your stocking this year for sure." "Stop it now," Clark shouted at the Santa robot, which was currently standing motionless. You don't understand. I have bills, responsibilities." Shoppers had heard Clark's ravings directed at the inanimate Santa, certain he must be a madman. The observers made a point to avoid walking anywhere near him. After all, the man was bent over, screaming in the face of what was essentially an oversized doll. A woman with a small child fled the store, making a beeline as far away from Clark as possible. The child was crying hysterically, upset by the man's loud raving. "You don't know anything about me," Clark screamed at the Santa. The toy store manager approached him from the side. His voice sounded less like that of a grown man and more like that of a small child. It made for a very disturbing sight, considering how big a man Clark was. "I know all about you, Clarky. I know what you did. You stole money, spent it all, and got away with it. Now you think your slate is clean and you're going to be free to start a new life. The truth is, you're going to be on my naughty list forever. You may think you got off easy, Clarky, but Santa knows. Santa always knows. Remember, I know if you've been bad or good, and you've been a bad little man, Clarky. There will be no more happy Christmases for you." "Don't say that. Please don't say that, Santa," Clark screamed as tears began to flow from his eyes. It was as if all years had melted away, and instead of being an angry middle-aged man, he had become a blubbering child who had been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The store manager came up behind Clark, grabbed him by the shoulder, and said, "Listen here, bud. Just who the hell do you think you are?" But before he could say anything else, Clark reacted, swinging around and backhanding his fist into the store manager's nose, knocking the man backwards. Clark may have been feeling and acting like a child, but his strength was still that of a large man. As a result, the store manager was knocked off balance, and the force of the blow caused him to crash through the store display window. As the manager fell, a large piece of broken glass, still jutting from the window's framework, sliced through his neck, practically decapitating him in the process. The body lay draped partway in the window, but most of its still twitching form lay inside the mall. But the twitching stopped after a few seconds. People were suddenly screaming and running from the scene. One small child stood in shocked silence, pointing at the dead man as the child's mouth hung open in horror. The child's mother scooped him up in her arms, rescuing him from the scene unfolding, all the while trying to convince him, "It's all just pretend, baby. It's just pretend." "Now you've gone and done it, Clarky. I honestly don't think I've known many boys as naughty as you," the voice of the robot Saint Nick said. Then again, there was that John Wayne Gacy and little Jeffrey Dahmer. That Johnny and Jeffy were about as naughty as you could get. I skipped right over the bag of coal for them. I gave them each a bucket of cow manure. Is that what I'm going to have to do with you, Clarky? Cow poop for little Clarky? Because I'm telling you truthfully, murdering someone isn't exactly the sort of thing that gets you back onto the nice list anytime soon. But Santa, it was an accident. Honest, I didn't mean for that to happen, I swear, Clark, who had but now almost completely reverted into the childhood version of himself, pleaded. The Santa voice in his head said, "Well, Clarky, it's really not my job to judge why it was you chose to do what you did. I just keep track of the results. And if you check out that guy you just put through the window, things aren't looking good for you. I mean, look at all that blood and check out how his head is barely attached to his neck, except for those few shredded muscle fibers. His head is dangling like a chicken with a broken neck. That poor fellow is about as dead can be. That sort of thing is naughty list material for sure, Clarky. Very naughty." All around the scene, those people who hadn't opted to flee had their cell phones up. A few, very few, were calling 911 to report the problem, but most were filming the event on their phones. No doubt the event would be all over the internet within the hour. "Santa, please not the naughty list," Clark pleaded uselessly. He hadn't meant to be naughty or to hurt that man. He begged the Santa replica to please forgive him and take him off the naughty list. But Santa ignored his pleas. Then, to make matters even worse, Santa began chanting his accusations at Clark, right in front of all the mall shoppers. "Naughty, naughty, naughty," the Santa bot shouted in the nagging sing-song tune kids saved for that Universal teaser. "Nah, nah, 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 nah. Stop it, Santa. Stop it. Clarky is naughty. He stole money. He's a naughty boy. He's on the naughty list." The animatronic abomination continued to tease. Clark had no idea that he was the only one hearing these chides. He believed everyone around him heard them as well, and they were all laughing at him. In reality, many of their faces bore looks of horror at the scene playing out before them. Some, of course, those with their phones recording, were morbidly fascinated. He finally couldn't take any more and swung a roundhouse right punch, which caved in the Santa _39's rubber face and knocked the robot to the floor. Clark jumped down on top of the thing and began tearing it to pieces, all the while screaming and crying, "Stop it, Santa. Stop it. I'm a good boy. I'm a good boy." More people had begun to show up with their phones, apparently no longer concerned about the raving madman, even though he had murdered the store manager and was presently destroying a robotic doll. After a few minutes, the crowd began to separate amid the shouts of, "Back off, people, let us through," as two city police officers made their way to the scene of the crime. When they reached Clark and not only saw him dismantling the Santa bot, but saw the bloody remains of the store manager, they drew their guns, pointed them directly at Clark, and shouted, "Police, stop what you're doing and lie face down on the ground with your hands where we can see them." Clark ignored them and continued smashing the machine. The first cop nodded to the second, who took out a different gun and shot a taser dart into Clark's back. As the electricity shot through Clark's body, his muscles spasmed, spittle flew from his mouth, and he fell to the mall floor, convulsing. Still inside his mind, Herbert the voice of that mechanical monster tormenting him. Clarky is naughty, 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 naughty. That was to say, until he felt the pressure in the center of his chest and the pain shooting down his left arm. "Oh my God. I'm having a heart attack. I'm going to die," Clark realized. Then he heard that horrible voice inside his head again. "That's right, Clarky. You're about to die. They're going to try to save you, but it won't work. But don't worry. I'll be right here with you, reminding you of what a naughty boy you are. Forever."